March 8, 1944, dawned cold and unforgiving over the English countryside, where a young American pilot named Captain Richard Peterson stood beside his P-51 Mustang, watching mechanics pour a mysterious new fuel into its tanks. The liquid caught the morning light, differently than standard aviation gasoline, shimmering with a dangerous promise that no one fully understood yet. Peterson had heard whispers in the officers' mess the night before, whispers about a fuel so powerful it could turn their already formidable fighter into something the Luftwaffe had never encountered. The German High Command sat comfortably in their war rooms that morning, confident in their tactical superiority. Their Focke-Wulf Fw-190s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s had dominated European skies for years, and their pilots remained some of the most experienced combat aviators in the world. Intelligence reports confirmed that American P-51 Mustangs, while graceful and well-armed, posed a manageable threat. The Germans calculated maximum speeds, engagement ranges, and combat ceilings with Prussian precision. Every number supported their confidence. What they could not calculate was the revolution brewing in Allied fuel laboratories. The story of 150-grade aviation fuel began not in England's airfields, but in America's industrial heartland, where chemists at Wright Field in Ohio had been wrestling with a seemingly impossible problem. Standard 100-octane fuel had carried the Allies through years of air combat, but aeronautical engineers kept pushing engines to their absolute limits, desperate for every additional mile per hour that might save a pilot's life. According to records maintained by the United States Army Air Force's Technical Division, researchers discovered that by increasing the fuel's aromatic hydrocarbon content and adding specific anti-knock compounds, they could create a fuel with unprecedented performance characteristics. Dr. Harold Barnett, a chemical engineer working alongside military aviation specialists, later documented the breakthrough in technical journals that would become foundational texts for post-war aviation development. The new fuel allowed engines to operate at manifold pressures previously considered catastrophic, where 100-octane fuel would cause engine knock and potential failure above certain power settings. This new 150-grade mixture, technically designated as 150-grade fuel due to its dual rating system, permitted pilots to push their throttles into emergency war power settings that extracted every possible horsepower from their Packard-built Merlin engines. Back in England, Peterson climbed into his cockpit, unaware that he carried the culmination of thousands of laboratory hours and millions of dollars in research. His crew chief, Master Sergeant Thomas O'Brien from Boston, secured the canopy and gave him the thumbs up. The briefing had been cryptic: test the new fuel under combat conditions, push the throttle past the previous red line markings, and report everything. The mission would take them deep into Germany, escorting B-17 flying fortresses to their targets near Berlin. As Peterson's engine roared to life, the sound carried a different note, a deeper, more aggressive rumble that resonated through the airframe. Ground crew members exchanged glances, some excited, others apprehensive. They were about to witness the beginning of a transformation that would fundamentally alter the air war over Europe, though none of them knew it yet. 6 months before Peterson's mission, in September 1943, Lieutenant Colonel Bruce Holloway stood in a cramped laboratory at Wright Field, staring at a blackboard covered with Michael formulas that might as well have been ancient Greek to a combat pilot. Dr. Barnett was explaining the molecular structure of tetraethyl lead and how increased concentrations could suppress engine knock at higher compression ratios. Holloway understood only one thing clearly: this fuel could make his fighters faster, and speed meant survival. The development of 150-grade fuel represented more than simple chemical refinement. It embodied a complete reimagining of what aviation fuel could be. Standard fuel development had focused on stability and consistency, ensuring that fuel performed predictably across various altitudes and temperatures. This new approach embraced controlled volatility. Engineers designed the fuel to withstand extreme pressures and temperatures inside cylinders, operating at power settings that would have destroyed engines just months earlier. The technical specifications, preserved in military archives, revealed fuel that could maintain stable combustion at manifold pressures exceeding 70 inches of mercury, levels previously thought impossible. British petroleum engineers at the Royal Aircraft Establishment in Farnborough collaborated closely with their American counterparts, sharing data from their own high-octane fuel experiments. Wing Commander David Henderson, a liaison officer between British and American aviation commands, facilitated the exchange of crucial information about engine tolerances and fuel chemistry. The British had been pushing their own fuel development, but the American breakthrough with aromatic hydrocarbon blending had exceeded anything Rolls-Royce engineers had achieved with their Merlin engines. The chemistry itself was elegant in its complexity. By carefully balancing various hydrocarbon chains, particularly toluene and benzene derivatives, chemists created a fuel that resisted detonation even under extreme compression. The addition of carefully measured quantities of tetraethyl lead provided the anti-knock properties essential for high-performance operation. But the real genius lay in the fuel's ability to cool intake charges through its vaporization properties, allowing for denser air-fuel mixtures that generated substantially more power. Production facilities scrambled to meet demand once testing proved successful. Refineries in Texas, California, and Louisiana retooled their cracking towers and distillation columns. The process required more sophisticated equipment and stricter quality control than standard aviation and gasoline. Each batch underwent rigorous testing. Laboratory analysis verified aromatic content, lead concentration, vapor pressure, and dozens of other specifications. A single contaminated batch could destroy engines worth thousands of dollars and, far worse, kill the pilots who flew them. In England, fuel depots near American airfields received their first shipments in February 1944. The fuel arrived in specially marked drums, distinguished by bright red bands painted around their centers. Ground crews received specific handling instructions. The higher lead content made the fuel more toxic, requiring additional safety precautions. Fuel trucks painted with warning stripes became common sights around airfields as the distribution network expanded. Colonel Hubert Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group, received one of the first full allocations for his P-47 Thunderbolt squadron. His pilots reported immediate performance improvements, faster climb rates, higher top speeds, and significantly improved high-altitude performance. The Thunderbolt's Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine responded magnificently to the new fuel. But everyone knew the real test would come with the P-51 Mustang, whose Packard Merlin engine operated at higher stress levels. The German aviation industry, meanwhile, remained completely oblivious to this development. Their intelligence services focused on counting Allied aircraft and tracking squadron movements, never imagining that a chemical innovation occurring thousands of miles away would soon render their performance calculations obsolete. January 21, 1944 marked the day that changed everything at the North American Aviation Factory in Inglewood, California. Engineers gathered around a P-51B Mustang mounted on a test stand, its Packard V1657 Merlin engine fitted with new instrumentation to measure performance with the experimental fuel. Test pilot Robert Chilton sat in the cockpit, checklist in hand, preparing to push the engine beyond every limit they had previously observed. The Packard-built Merlin engine was already a masterpiece of engineering, a licensed version of the legendary British Rolls-Royce design that had powered Spitfires through the Battle of Britain. American production had refined the design further, improving manufacturing tolerances and reliability. The engine's two-stage, two-speed supercharger allowed it to maintain power at high altitudes where German fighters struggled to operate. But even this remarkable power plant had limits that 150-grade fuel was about to obliterate. When Chilton advanced the throttle past the previous red line and engaged war emergency power, the transformation was immediate and shocking. The engine, which normally produced about 1,400 horsepower at military power, suddenly generated over 2,000 horsepower. The test stand shuddered under the increased thrust. Instrumentation needles swung into ranges that had been marked structural failure zone on previous tests. Yet the engine ran smoothly, its exhaust note deepening to a thunder that rattled windows across the factory floor. Edgar Schmood, the chief designer of the P-51, watched the test with barely contained excitement. The Austrian-born engineer had immigrated to America years earlier and poured his genius into creating what he believed would be the ultimate fighter aircraft. Now, his creation was exceeding even his optimistic projections. According to documentation preserved in the National Air and Space Museum archives, Schmood immediately began calculating new performance envelopes. If the engine could reliably produce this much power, the Mustang's speed and climb rate would increase dramatically. The physics were straightforward but remarkable. The additional power allowed pilots to push their aircraft to speeds approaching 490 miles per hour in level flight at optimal altitude, approximately 60 to 70 miles per hour faster than previous maximum speeds. This increase was not merely incremental, it was revolutionary. Speed translated directly to tactical advantage in air combat. A fighter that could chase down any enemy aircraft or escape from dangerous situations at will became nearly invincible in skilled hands. Cooling became the primary engineering challenge. The increased power generated substantially more heat, pushing the Mustang's cooling system to its limits. Engineers redesigned coolant circulation paths and enlarged radiator ducting. The distinctive ventral radiator scoop that gave the P-51 its sleek profile required modification to handle increased thermal loads. These changes were incorporated into production aircraft beginning in early 1944, though field modification kits were also developed for existing fighters already in Europe. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Christian, assigned to evaluate the modified aircraft for combat suitability, flew one of the upgraded Mustangs in February and submitted a report that read more like a love letter than a technical evaluation. He described an aircraft that climbed like it was being pulled by invisible cables that accelerated in dives until the airframe shuddered on the edge of compressibility, and that could sustain high-speed flight at altitudes where oxygen masks and heated flight suits were absolutely essential for pilot survival. The Army Air Forces immediately classified the fuel's specifications and performance characteristics as top secret. Intelligence officers worried that if Germans captured documents describing the fuel's capabilities, they might develop countermeasures or worse, create their own high-performance fuel. Security around fuel shipments intensified, with military police guarding storage facilities and transport routes. March 15, 1944, brought perfect weather over Germany, clear skies, unlimited visibility, and temperatures cold enough to maximize engine performance. Captain Peterson led his squadron, the 357th Fighter Group's Yoxford Boys, on their first operational mission using 150-grade fuel. Their assignment seemed routine: escort B-17s attacking aircraft factories near Augsburg and engage any Luftwaffe fighters that rose to intercept. The bomber stream stretched for miles, hundreds of heavy bombers flying in tight formations, their contrails painting white lines across the blue sky. Peterson flew at 28,000 feet, his Mustang feeling different today, more responsive, almost eager. The gauge showing manifold pressure had been recalibrated, with new markings indicating war emergency power settings that would have been impossible just weeks earlier. He had been ordered to use this power only when necessary. The additional stress on engines might reduce their operational lifespan, though nobody knew for certain yet. German radar stations detected the incoming raid early, and Luftwaffe commanders scrambled their fighters. Hauptmann Heinrich Erler led his staffel of Bf-109 G6Is upward from their base near Munich, climbing aggressively to intercept the American formation. Erler was a veteran with over 200 combat missions, holder of the Knight's Cross, and absolutely confident in his aircraft's capabilities. He knew the Americans would have fighter escorts, but his intelligence briefings assured him that at these altitudes his 109s maintained performance parity with P-51s. The two formations spotted each other simultaneously at roughly 26,000 feet. Peterson saw the German fighters climbing from below and ahead, counting at least 20 aircraft in a loose formation. He radioed his flight leaders, calling out positions and altitudes. The Germans, adhering to their preferred tactics, tried to gain altitude advantage before engaging. This was textbook Luftwaffe doctrine: altitude equals energy, energy equals options. Peterson made a decision that would be analyzed in after-action reports for years afterward. Instead of maintaining his escort position and forcing the Germans to come through him to reach the bombers, he pushed his throttle full forward into war emergency power and dove directly at the German formation. His three wingmen followed instantly, trusting their leader's judgment. What happened next shattered German assumptions about American fighter capabilities. Peterson's Mustang accelerated like no aircraft Erler had ever encountered. Within seconds, Peterson's diving speed exceeded 470 miles per hour, his aircraft's sleek profile cutting through air that felt thick as water at these velocities. The closure rate caught the German pilots completely off guard. One moment the Americans were distant specks, the next, they were firing position. Peterson selected a 109 on the formation's edge and opened fire at 300 yards, his .650 caliber machine guns throwing out a devastating stream of projectiles. Tracer rounds walked across the German fighter's wing, sparks erupting where bullets struck metal. The 109's wing folded upward, fuel streaming from ruptured tanks, and the aircraft tumbled out of control. Erler saw this happen in his peripheral vision and immediately tried to turn into the attack. But Peterson's Mustang was already past him, climbing away at a rate that seemed physically impossible. Lieutenant James Browning, flying as Peterson's wingman, engaged a 109 that attempted to follow their leader. With war emergency power engaged, Browning simply pulled vertical, climbing at angles that left the German pilot staring in disbelief. The Messerschmitt, normally an excellent climber, could not match this performance. At 15,000 feet of vertical climb, the 109 stalled out, hanging on its propeller for a moment before falling away. Browning rolled inverted, pulled through, and dove back into the fight. The entire engagement lasted less than 10 minutes, but those minutes revealed a fundamental shift in the balance of air power over Europe. The Germans lost 7 aircraft confirmed destroyed, with at least 4 more damaged sufficiently to force emergency landings. Peterson's squadron suffered no losses and only minor damage to 2 aircraft from defensive fire. More importantly, every German pilot who survived the encounter returned to base with stories about American fighters that seemed to have doubled their performance overnight. March 18, 1944, found General Major Adolf Galland, general of the fighter arm of the Luftwaffe, sitting in his Berlin headquarters reading combat reports that made no sense. Galland was himself an ace pilot, with over 100 confirmed victories, intimately familiar with the capabilities of both German and Allied aircraft. The reports crossing his desk described American P-51 Mustangs performing maneuvers that should have been aerodynamically impossible. Multiple squadron commanders reported similar encounters. The Americans were climbing faster, flying higher, and achieving speeds that exceeded every technical specification in Luftwaffe intelligence files. Pilots described being overtaken in dives by Mustangs that seemed to be operating in a different performance envelope entirely. Some reports were dismissed initially as exaggeration. Combat stress frequently caused pilots to overestimate enemy capabilities. But the pattern was too consistent to ignore. Oberleutnant Franz Stiegler, a respected pilot with considerable combat experience, submitted a particularly detailed account. According to material referenced in post-war interviews and historical records, Stiegler had encountered a formation of P-51s while climbing to intercept bombers near Frankfurt. His 109, freshly overhauled and performing at peak efficiency, simply could not match the Mustang's climb rate. When he attempted to engage, the American fighters accelerated away from him effortlessly, maintaining speeds he estimated at over 450 miles per hour in level flight, speeds his aircraft could only achieve in steep dives. Galland convened an emergency meeting with technical experts from the Reich Air Ministry and representatives from Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf. The engineers were skeptical. Their calculations, based on known engine specifications and airframe design of the P-51, did not support these performance claims. The Packard Merlin engine, while excellent, had defined power limits. The Mustang's airframe, though aerodynamically efficient, faced the same physical laws as German designs. Something was wrong with either the pilot reports or their fundamental understanding of American capabilities. Major Wilhelm Herget, a technical officer who had studied captured Allied aircraft, proposed a theory that initially seemed absurd. What if the Americans had developed a significantly improved fuel? He pointed out that German intelligence had focused extensively on aircraft design and pilot training, but had largely overlooked Allied fuel technology. Germany's own fuel situation was deteriorating. Quality was declining as the war ground on, forcing German engines to operate at reduced power settings to avoid damaging detonation. Galland ordered immediate analysis of any captured American fuel samples. Luftwaffe ground crews were instructed to carefully preserve fuel from any downed American aircraft and forward it immediately to testing facilities. He also requested that intelligence services intensify their efforts to obtain detailed information about Allied fuel production and composition. If the Americans had indeed achieved a breakthrough in fuel technology, the implications were staggering. At the Rechlin Secret Flight Test Center, German test pilots flew captured P-51 Mustangs using German fuel. The aircraft performed well but within expected parameters, fast, maneuverable, but not supernaturally so. These tests, conducted without knowledge of 150-grade fuel, inadvertently confirmed Herget's hypothesis. The aircraft's potential was limited by the fuel available, not by its design. Meanwhile, American bomber raids continued relentlessly, and with each mission, more German pilots encountered these inexplicably improved Mustangs. The psychological impact was substantial. Luftwaffe morale, already strained by numerical inferiority and constant combat, suffered further when pilots realized they might be flying technologically inferior aircraft. Some squadron commanders began advising their pilots to avoid engagement with P-51s unless circumstances were overwhelmingly favorable, a remarkable reversal from the aggressive tactics that had characterized German fighter operations earlier in the war. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, when briefed on the situation, refused to believe the reports initially, accusing his pilots of cowardice and incompetence. This was characteristic of Göring's increasingly detached leadership style. He insisted that German aircraft were superior and that any performance differences resulted from poor pilot quality or tactics. Galland, frustrated but constrained by military hierarchy, could only continue gathering evidence and hoping that reality would eventually override political delusion. The truth was becoming inescapable. The Americans had achieved something the Germans had not anticipated. The air superiority that the Luftwaffe had once enjoyed was evaporating, not because of inferior piloting or courage, but because of chemistry occurring thousands of miles away in American refineries. April 2, 1944 witnessed a mission that would be studied in air combat doctrine for decades. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer, leading the 302nd Fighter Group, received orders to conduct a fighter sweep deep into Germany, no bombers to escort, just pure air superiority operations designed to destroy Luftwaffe fighters wherever they could be found. Meyer's 24 Mustangs, all running 150-grade fuel, took off from their base in England and headed east with what amounted to hunting licenses. The tactical implications of the fuel upgrade extended far beyond simple speed increases. Meyer and other experienced squadron leaders were discovering entirely new combat techniques, enabled by their aircraft's enhanced performance. Traditional fighter tactics had been constrained by energy management. Pilots carefully conserved speed and altitude, knowing that once these were lost in combat maneuvering, regaining them took precious time and created vulnerability. Now, with war emergency power available, Mustang pilots could recover energy almost instantaneously. Meyer's formation crossed into German airspace at 30,000 feet, flying in loose finger, 4 formations that maximized visibility and mutual support. They had fuel for nearly 4 hours of flight time. Another Mustang advantage that 150-grade fuel enhanced by allowing more efficient cruise power settings. No German fighter could match this combination of speed, altitude capability, and range. The strategic implications were profound. American fighters could now escort bombers to any target in Germany and still have fuel reserves for extended combat. Radar stations tracked the American fighters, and German controllers scrambled interceptors from multiple airfields. Hauptmann Walter Dahl, commanding a group of FW-190 A8s, climbed aggressively toward the American formation. Dahl was an experienced leader who had studied American tactics extensively. He planned to use his fighters' excellent roll rate and firepower to advantage, attacking from the side where the Mustang's superior speed mattered less than maneuverability. The engagement began at 28,000 feet when Meyer's formation spotted the German fighters climbing from below. Instead of waiting for the Germans to reach their altitude, Meyer did something that would have been suicidal with older performance parameters. He dove directly at the German formation, maintaining full power throughout. His speed built rapidly, passing 400 miles per hour, then 450. The German pilot saw him coming, but underestimated his closure rate. Meyer flashed through the German formation, firing in short bursts, his deflection shooting honed by hundreds of hours of practice. One FW-190 took hits in the engine, trailing smoke immediately. Meyer continued his dive for another 1,000 feet, then pulled smoothly into a vertical climb that defied everything Dahl thought he knew about energy management. The Mustang climbed effortlessly back to engagement altitude, ready to attack again within seconds. This boom and zoom tactic, refined to perfection by the enhanced performance, became the signature American technique. Mustang pilots could dive through enemy formations at speeds Germans could not match, attack with precision, and then climb away before effective counterattack was possible. The Germans' traditional advantage in turning dogfights became irrelevant. American pilots simply refused to fight that type of engagement. Lieutenant Charles Chuck Yeager, flying with the 357th Fighter Group, developed his own variation. According to his own detailed post-war accounts, Yeager used the Mustang's speed to chase German fighters as they attempted to escape by diving away, traditionally a reliable evasion technique. With 150 grade fuel, Yeager's Mustang could dive faster than anything the Luftwaffe flew, catching opponents who thought they had successfully disengaged. He achieved ace status in a matter of weeks. His success built on tactical innovations enabled by fuel chemistry most pilots barely understood. The Germans tried to adapt. Some units adopted standing patrols at high altitude, hoping to maintain energy advantage. Others attempted to lure American fighters into turning engagements at lower altitudes, where the FW-190's superior roll rate might prevail. Nothing worked consistently. The fundamental performance gap, created by that remarkable fuel, simply could not be overcome by tactics alone. Group Captain James "Johnny" Johnson of the Royal Air Force, flying Spitfires alongside American units, observed these developments with professional interest. British fighters, while excellent, had not received the same fuel upgrades as rapidly due to supply priorities. May 10, 1944 marked a breakthrough for German intelligence when a partially intact fuel sample was recovered from a P-51 that crash-landed near Bremen. The pilot, Lieutenant Robert Jackson, had been shot down during a strafing run and forced to belly land in a field. German soldiers captured him before he could destroy his aircraft completely, and alert technical personnel recognized the value of the remaining fuel in the tanks. The sample reached the Heeresversuchsanstalt testing facility at Kummersdorf within 24 hours. Chemists there began immediate analysis, and what they discovered confirmed the worst fears of Luftwaffe commanders. The fuel's composition revealed sophisticated refining techniques that German industry, struggling under sustained Allied bombing and resource shortages, could not quickly replicate. The aromatic hydrocarbon content alone exceeded German production capabilities by a significant margin. Dr. Heinrich Weber, the chief chemist analyzing the sample, prepared a comprehensive report for the Air Ministry. Weber documented octane ratings that exceeded German fuel by approximately 50 points, anti-knock additives in concentrations that German refineries could not produce in sufficient quantities, and chemical stability that suggested quality control standards Germany was no longer maintaining. His conclusion was stark. Even if German industry could develop equivalent fuel formulas, producing them at scale while under constant bombardment was likely impossible. At the Messerschmitt works in Regensburg, engineers worked desperately to extract more performance from the Bf-109. Chief designer Willy Messerschmitt reviewed proposals for engine modifications that might close the performance gap. Water methanol injection systems could provide short bursts of increased power, and some aircraft were modified accordingly. However, these systems were complex, unreliable, and provided only temporary power increases, rather than the sustained performance American pilots enjoyed with their superior fuel. Focke-Wulf pursued a different approach. Their engineers developed the TA-152, an extremely high-altitude variant of the FW-190, with a longer wingspan and more powerful engine. Kurt Tank, the company's design director, believed that superior altitude performance might counteract the American speed advantage. Test pilots achieved remarkable results at altitudes exceeding 40,000 feet, where the TA-152 could outperform any Allied fighter. Unfortunately, production delays and Allied bombing of manufacturing facilities meant that only a handful of these aircraft reached operational units before the war's end. The German jet program, particularly the Me-262, represented the most promising response to Allied air superiority. The jet's raw speed exceeded even upgraded P-51 Mustangs by a comfortable margin. Major Walter Nowotny, commanding the 1st Operational Jet Fighter Unit, achieved impressive success in autumn 1944, demonstrating that the Me-262 could engage American fighters with impunity when properly employed. However, mechanical unreliability, pilot training challenges, and chronic fuel shortages limited the jet's impact. American intelligence officers, meanwhile, worked to keep 150-grade fuel specifications secret. When aircraft went down over enemy territory, pilots received explicit instructions to destroy their aircraft if possible, specifically to prevent fuel sample recovery. Ground crews were trained to drain fuel tanks from damaged aircraft before they were abandoned. Security officers regularly reminded pilots that even casual discussions about their aircraft's improved performance could compromise operational security. The broader industrial competition had effectively been decided long before these specific technical battles. American productive capacity, protected by oceanic distances from enemy attack, could develop and produce revolutionary technologies like high-performance aviation fuel, while simultaneously building aircraft at rates German industry could never match. According to production records maintained by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, American factories produced over 96,000 combat aircraft in 1944 alone, more than German industry had built throughout the entire war. British refineries also began producing 150-grade fuel by mid-1944, though in smaller quantities than American facilities. Royal Air Force Spitfires and Hawker Tempests received allocations, improving their performance significantly. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding noted in classified memos that the fuel represented perhaps the single most important technical advantage the Allies possessed, more significant even than radar or numerical superiority. August 5, 1944, brought a mission that symbolized how completely the air war had transformed. Captain Peterson, now a major and squadron commander, led 48 P-51 Mustangs on an escort mission to Berlin, the heart of the Third Reich. 18 months earlier, such a mission would have been impossible. Now it was routine, almost mundane in its execution. The Mustangs flew at 32,000 feet, each carrying full internal fuel plus external drop tanks, their Merlin engines purring smoothly on a 150-grade fuel that made this seemingly impossible mission merely challenging. German fighters rose to intercept, but their tactics had evolved from aggressive engagement to desperate survival. Experienced Luftwaffe pilots had learned painful lessons about fighting these enhanced Mustangs. They attacked only when circumstances provided overwhelming advantage, retreating quickly when American fighters responded. The psychological transformation was complete. An air force that had terrorized Europe now flew defensively, conserving strength, hoping merely to survive rather than dominate. The bomber stream Peterson escorted included over 800 B-17s and B-24s, supported by more than 600 fighters. This massive aerial armada represented industrial and technological superiority on a scale that Germany could no longer contest. The 150-grade fuel enabling extended range and superior performance had effectively removed the Luftwaffe as a strategic factor in the war. German cities and industries lay exposed to round-the-clock bombing, hastening the Reich's inevitable collapse. Post-war analysis revealed the full scope of what 150-grade fuel had achieved. American fighters flying with this fuel maintained approximately 90% combat effectiveness, meaning that in any given engagement, American forces could expect to achieve their objectives with minimal losses. German fighter forces, by contrast, suffered attrition rates exceeding 30% monthly by late 1944, an unsustainable drain that no amount of pilot courage could overcome. The technological lessons extended far beyond World War II. The development of high-performance aviation fuel established principles that guided jet fuel development in subsequent decades. The careful balance of hydrocarbon chemistry, Anti-knock additives and quality control became foundational knowledge for the aerospace industry. Modern military jet fuel, designated JP-8, traces its conceptual lineage directly to the work done by chemists at Wright Field in 1943 and 1944. Individual stories illuminated the broader historical narrative. Captain Peterson survived the war with 11 confirmed victories, later becoming a test pilot for North American aviation. He flew the first production P-51H Mustang, an even more refined version that could exceed 500 miles per hour, thanks to further airframe improvements combined with 150 grade fuel. In his memoirs, published in 1983, Peterson reflected on how few pilots truly understood that their survival depended as much on chemists they never met as on their own skill and courage. Master Sergeant O'Brien, the crew chief who had fueled Peterson's aircraft on that first mission in March 1944, remained with the 357th Fighter Group throughout the European campaign. He kept meticulous maintenance logs documenting engine performance and reliability with the new fuel. His records, preserved in the Air Force Historical Research Agency archives, provided invaluable data for post-war engine development programs. O'Brien noted that engines running 150 grade fuel, despite operating at higher stress levels, actually demonstrated better reliability than older engines running standard fuel, a testament to improved manufacturing quality and better lubrication provided by the fuel's enhanced formulation. On the German side, General Major Galland survived the war and later wrote extensively about the Luftwaffe's technological and tactical evolution. In his analysis, preserved in multiple historical texts, Galland identified American fuel technology as one of the three decisive factors that determined the air war's outcome, alongside industrial production capacity and pilot training quality. He noted with professional admiration how the Americans had achieved victory through integrated technical superiority, rather than relying on any single wonder weapon. The story of 150 grade fuel ultimately became a story about how wars are won, not through dramatic battlefield heroics alone, but through patient scientific research, industrial capacity, and the integration of countless small technical advantages into overwhelming strategic superiority. Those chemists laboring in Ohio laboratories, refinery workers in Texas processing aromatic hydrocarbons, and logistics personnel shipping fuel drums across the Atlantic contributed as essentially to victory as the pilots who flew the final missions. Today, restored P-51 Mustangs flying at airshows cannot use authentic 150 grade fuel. Modern environmental regulations prohibit the high lead content that made it so effective. These beautiful aircraft fly on unleaded aviation gasoline, their performance reduced to levels the Germans would have found merely challenging rather than insurmountable. Yet even in this diminished state, the Mustang's grace and power hint at what those wartime pilots experienced when they pushed their throttles forward, felt that surge of power, and climbed into skies where chemistry had given them wings fast enough to chase down history itself. The sound of a Merlin engine at full power remains unmistakable, a mechanical symphony that represents one of humanity's finest engineering achievements. That sound, amplified and enhanced by fuel that turned good aircraft into great ones, echoed across European skies for crucial months when the outcome of civilization itself hung in balance. The Germans never expected a fuel formula to change everything, but that blindness to the power of scientific innovation cost them control of the skies, and ultimately, the war.